A real crime. In a series of podcasts, I want you to travel down some lonely roads with me. These are the roads I traveled with families who never got to say goodbye to loved ones. These family members were fated to live the rest of their lives waiting and wondering. I will begin this series with unsolved murders, but I will also revisit cases that include arrests because aspects of the case are worth re-examining. I wrote these stories when I worked as a reporter for the Charleston Gazette. Police never found a gun, a knife, a hammer, or a ligature in a cabin on the New River the day they answered an emergency call involving a child. Of course, Jeremy Bell's body bore no indication that he'd been harmed by those most common instruments of destruction. How the child died was a puzzle. He was found in a cabin that belonged to his former elementary school principal. Edgar Fredericks, Jr. told police he had no idea what happened to the healthy child, so Fredericks was no help when paramedics arrived to attend to the child. The same day, November 8, 1997, that Bell was found dead in his cabin, Fredericks went to his Fayetteville, West Virginia house and tried to commit suicide. At the cabin, the officers collected evidence and took pictures, then did nothing. That could have been the end of the story, and another family would be left to grieve for a child. In the last episode, I explained a notorious series of West Virginia murders will never be solved for several reasons, including the fact that a crucial piece of evidence was allowed to leave police custody. In this case, each piece of evidence was available, but it was not stored under proper conditions and never cataloged correctly until 52 months after the child died. I've written a book about this case I hope to publish. I'm sharing parts of the book for the next episodes. Episode 25, Jeremy Bell. Months before Jeremy Bell was murdered, 4 liters of chloroform, almost a gallon, arrived at Beckwith Elementary School for Edgar Fredericks. Such a large volume of toxic material would more appropriately arrive at a research facility instead of a place that also had swing sets on the playground. The deadly chemical arrived near the end of the school term. If Fredericks bought it for a school science project, why not order it at the beginning of a new school term? If the school had a genuine use for the chloroform, who would watch over the volatile chemical during the summer months while the school was not in session? The company, Carolina Biological Supply, that provided the chloroform will not sell its products to individuals. They only supply educational and research facilities as well as businesses. From the manufacturer, the cardboard shipping box was stamped with a professionally made skull and crossbones logo and the word toxic. Members of the Fayette County Sheriff's Department noticed the flattened box floating in the New River behind Fredericks' cabin and brought the box to their office. In Fayette County, school board staff members kept track of any item that was purchased and submitted a purchase order to the Fayette County Board of Education. Once police learned that Fredericks ordered chloroform, they set out to find the paper trail. After a long search, they found that Fredericks paid for the chloroform from his own checking account. They discovered Fredericks wrote check number 1418 for $135.69 from his checking account at Fayette County National Bank. As he cataloged all the steps he and others took in this investigation, Fayette County Sheriff Bill Laird wrote in the report he compiled, "The presence of the chloroform shipment box in the New River immediately behind the cabin and slightly downstream where Jeremy Bell died ties this chloroform to the investigation and therefore requires further review and consideration in light of the other evidence relevant to this investigation. Doctors know chloroform can be eliminated from the body within 8 hours after exposure. As Laird learned, this might mean it could have gone undetected in Bell's body at the time of his autopsy, but it can be absorbed in fat cells. After Dr. Irwin Sopher retired as West Virginia State Medical Examiner, Dr. James H. Kaplan took his place. Sopher performed Bell's autopsy. Kaplan, who respected Sopher's work, had also voiced some disagreements with Sopher's conclusions. In July 2002, Laird and the two officers assigned to Bell's case, Senior Trooper R.C. Workman and Detective Corporal J.L. Brown of the Fayette County Sheriff's Department, met with Dr. Kaplan in his office. Kaplan believed that the levels of the prescription drug in Bell's body were not enough to lead to its death. Kaplan thought the levels would make Bell lethargic, but not enough to cause him to choke on his vomit and die. That was Sopher's diagnosis. Besides the episodes of vomiting, the autopsy clearly showed very marked cerebral edema, swelling. Dr. Sopher did not find any evidence of a previous head injury or any natural disease in Bell's brain. After Laird told Kaplan about finding chloroform shipped to Fredericks at his elementary school, Kaplan said, "This would explain a lot of things." After he studied the autopsy and the toxicology report, Kaplan believed that the cerebral edema and the subsequent swelling of the brain was brought about by disruption of oxygen to the brain. Kaplan said this lack of oxygen lasted at least 4 to 5 minutes, and it was followed by a period of at least half an hour where the essential functions of the body were restored. Bell's heart was still beating. They also discussed the abrasions on Bell's body. The county medical examiner who saw Bell first, before his body was sent to the state medical examiner, and the first detective to look at Bell, each observed the unusual markings. In his autopsy report, Sopher believed that some of the abrasions could be as a result of the rescue breathing Fredericks said he performed on Bell. Kaplan said they could just as easily be attributed to defensive injuries as Bell struggled against Fredericks. Once chloroform entered the discussion, Kaplan said Bell could have been struggling to remove something covering his face, perhaps the forced inhalation of chloroform. Maybe Fredericks was guided by old movies where the villain presses a chloroform-soaked handkerchief over the face of the innocent maid so that he can carry her off and have his way with her. Criminals have a history of using chloroform. Wikipedia reported that in 1894, H. H. Holmes, the serial killer, was the first to use chloroform on his victims. In 2007, a man confessed to using stun guns and chloroform to sexually assault minors, according to Wikipedia. The same entry goes to state that chloroform must be pressed against someone's nose and mouth for at least 5 minutes of inhaling before someone becomes unconscious. And chillingly, the entry states most criminal use of chloroform also involves another drug being co-administered. At Beckwith Elementary School, the investigators, Captain Brown and Senior Trooper Workman, also met with Debbie Bennett, who worked as Fredericks' secretary for about 7 years. Bennett told police that Fredericks had ordered several items from Carolina Biological, especially when he taught science. She told police it was the school's practice to order from county funds and to assign a purchase order. She said they had an invoice on file for every vendor she paid. She also said it would be unusual for Fredericks to pay for supplies with his own money. She also had no memory of the chloroform being delivered to the school. All people who knew Bell described him in positive terms. Bennett, who saw him at school daily, said, "Jeremy Bell was a nice boy. He was a very handsome young man. He made good grades. He was never in trouble. He was just a good kid." Investigators returned to Fayetteville and the office of the Fayette County Board of Education. The board had an invoice from Carolina Biological for the chloroform shipment. The investigators learned a board employee in the accounting section wrote a note on the invoice. When they spoke with her, She also told them she clearly remembered that she contacted Fredericks about the invoice. She said Fredericks told her to forward the invoice to him at Beckwith Elementary and that the school would pay the invoice. The chloroform also turns up in the federal civil rights suit Bell's family filed against the Board of Education. Many times families file civil suits even if a criminal case has been filed. Sometimes families file civil suits in an effort to make information public and prompt criminal charges. There are distinct differences between civil and criminal proceedings. In a civil suit, a person might be found guilty of a violation and be fined, but in civil matters, jail is not a penalty. Bell's lawyers for the family included chloroform as an important part of their federal civil rights suit. The family faulted the Fayette County Board of Education for allowing Fredericks to obtain chloroform through the school's purchasing system under circumstances where Frederick was not even required to explain why he should be ordering a dangerous chemical, which is commonly known to be used to disable human victims, the suit states. Police could never locate the large amount of chloroform that came to the school, but they wanted to find any trace of it in Bell's body. The former county medical examiner in this case was also one of its unsung heroes. The late Dr. Curtis Thomas was the first doctor to see the child. He immediately thought the death was suspicious. He ordered the paramedic on the scene to draw Bell's blood, even though the body would go on to the state medical examiner for a complete autopsy. Thomas also noted the marks on the child's body seemed suspicious to him. Without the blood drawn the day the child was found, this case would probably never have been solved, but that blood sat unrefrigerated for 52 months. In order to find out what evidence the blood might yield, experts from out of state had to test the blood. I will talk about what the blood yielded in the next episode. Thanks, as always, for joining me, and thanks to Tommy Signer for his always great work. Please join me next Wednesday for a new episode of A Real Crime by Susan Williams.